Deep inside the tombs of the Valley of the Kings, the air is dead, silent, and thick with the dust of millennia. On the walls, vibrant paintings and intricate hieroglyphs cover every square inch, telling the stories of pharaohs and their journey to the afterlife. They are masterpieces of art, created in absolute, suffocating darkness thousands of feet inside the earth. And this presents us with a terrifying, impossible problem. How did the artists see what they were doing? The simple answer, the one we all think of, is torches. But the ceilings of these tombs are pristine. There is no soot. Not a single black smudge you would expect from thousands of hours of open flame. Archaeologists have swept every inch of these chambers, and the evidence simply isn't there. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, yet there's no mention of using complex systems of mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into the winding corridors of a tomb. It would be a geometric nightmare, and the light would be too faint to work by. So we are left with a paradox. Intricate, colorful work, created in a place of absolute blackness, with no known light source. For centuries, this mystery was a footnote in history, a puzzle with no pieces, until a discovery was made in a dark, forgotten crypt, beneath a remote temple. A discovery that suggests the ancient Egyptians didn't need torches, because they had something else. Something impossible. Something that looks exactly like a giant electric light bulb. The carving is hidden away, deep beneath the main floor of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. To get there, you descend a steep, narrow staircase into a series of claustrophobic underground chambers. These crypts were not for burial. They were the most secret, sacred parts of the temple, where priests performed rituals to celebrate the creation of the world. And on the wall of one of these crypts, they left behind a picture, a schematic, that has baffled scientists and historians for decades. It shows a large, clear, pear-shaped bulb. Inside it, a long, wavy serpent snakes its way from a base at one end to the tip at the other. This snake emerges from a lotus flower, which seems to function as a socket, holding the bulb in place. At the base of this socket is what looks like a thick cable, which runs to a rectangular box, where a figure, perhaps a god, seems to be tending to it. Supporting the entire device is a large pillar with 4 horizontal lines across the top, an object that looks uncannily like a modern high-voltage electrical insulator. 2 figures are shown holding up these strange objects, their arms outstretched as if in a demonstration. To a modern eye, the image is unmistakable. It's a diagram of a large-scale lighting system. A bulb, a filament, a socket, a power cord, and an insulator. The question is, how could a civilization that supposedly built the pyramids with copper chisels and brute force possess technology that we ourselves only mastered in the last 150 years? Is this carving proof of a lost chapter of human history? Or is it something else entirely? The official explanation, the one you will find in any Egyptology textbook, is far more mundane, yet deeply symbolic. Mainstream archaeologists will tell you this is not a light bulb at all. It is a classic scene from Egyptian mythology. They say the bulb is not a bulb, but the womb of the sky goddess, Nut. The snake inside is not an electrical filament, but the serpent god Harsomtus, representing the rising sun, being born from a lotus flower, a potent symbol of creation and rebirth. The cable, they argue, is simply the stem of the lotus. And the large pillar underneath? That is a jet pillar, one of the most common symbols in ancient Egypt, representing the backbone of the god Osiris, a symbol of stability and power. To them, the entire scene is a complex religious allegory, a visual prayer for the daily rebirth of the sun and the stability of the universe. It's a beautiful, poetic interpretation that fits perfectly within our established understanding of ancient Egyptian beliefs. Case closed. But what if our established understanding is wrong? What happens when you show this image not to an Egyptologist but to an electrical engineer? They see something entirely different. They don't see a myth, they see a machine. In the 1970s, a controversial author named Erich von Däniken rocketed to fame with his book Chariots of the Gods, which proposed that aliens had visited humanity in the ancient past, leaving their technological fingerprints all over our history. For von Däniken and his followers, the Dendera Light wasn't a symbol, it was a blueprint. They argued the carving depicted a specific type of low-pressure discharge tube, something like a Crookes tube, which was a forerunner to the modern fluorescent light. In a Crookes tube, when you pass a high-voltage current through a near vacuum inside a glass bulb, the trace gases inside begin to glow, often in a serpentine snake-like pattern. The visual match is stunning. The engineers who support this theory point out every detail. The snake perfectly mimics the path of an electrical arc in a low-pressure environment. The lotus flower socket is a perfect representation of a high-voltage insulator, necessary to prevent the massive electrical charge from grounding out. The jet pillar, they claim, with its stacked, ribbed appearance, is not the backbone of a god, but an almost perfect replica of a modern D'Arsonval insulator, a device used in the early days of electricity to handle extremely high voltages. Even the cable leading to the box fits the narrative: a power source, perhaps a generator, or maybe something even more exotic, like the mysterious object known as the Baghdad Battery, another supposed ancient artifact found in modern-day Iraq that bears a striking resemblance to a galvanic cell. The figures aren't worshipping a god being born. They are technicians operating a sophisticated piece of equipment. Suddenly, the impossible problem of the dark tombs has a potential and terrifying solution. The Egyptians didn't need torches. They didn't need mirrors. They had electricity. They had light. It's an idea that seems ripped from the pages of science fiction. And it's an idea that mainstream science utterly rejects as fantasy. They claim the engineers are just seeing what they want to see, projecting modern technology onto ancient art, a classic case of pareidolia. They argue there is zero archaeological evidence to support the existence of electricity in ancient Egypt. No wires have ever been found in the tombs. No remnants of glass bulbs, no generators. All we have is this one ambiguous carving hidden in a crypt. But the proponents of the ancient lightbulb theory have an answer for that. They say the reason we don't find any evidence is because this wasn't common technology. It was sacred technology, a secret known only to a select few high priests, used in the most holy of rituals, deep beneath the temple. And perhaps the most compelling piece of evidence they present is not what's on the walls of the Dendera crypt, but what isn't. Just like in the tombs of the Pharaohs, the ceilings of these cramped, underground chambers are completely free of soot. They were lit by a clean, smokeless light source. The mainstream explanation? The priests worked in the dark. But is it plausible that artists and scribes created these perfect, detailed carvings in total blackness? The two sides are at a complete impasse. On one hand, you have the Egyptologists, armed with a deep understanding of mythology and symbolism, who see a beautiful religious story. On the other, you have engineers and alternative theorists armed with technical knowledge who see a functional device. The visual evidence is so jarring, so compelling, that it's hard to dismiss it outright. It forces us to ask, could a civilization we associate with ancient rituals and pyramids have secretly harnessed one of nature's most powerful forces? To even begin to answer that, we have to look beyond this one carving and search for other clues they may have left behind. Did the ancient Egyptians understand the fundamental principles of electricity? The answer to that question might be even more shocking than a light bulb in a pharaoh's tomb. To find that answer, we have to travel a few hundred miles northeast of Dendera, and forward in time about 2,000 years, to a dusty patch of earth near modern-day Baghdad. In 1936, workers excavating an ancient village unearthed a peculiar object, a simple clay jar, about 6 inches tall. Nothing unusual about that. But what was inside it was anything but simple. Sealed with an asphalt plug was a cylinder of rolled-up copper, and inside that copper cylinder, suspended in the center but not touching the sides, was an iron rod. This object, now known as the Baghdad Battery, shouldn't exist. It looks for all the world like a primitive galvanic cell, the basis of a modern battery. When the German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig first examined it in 1938, he was stunned. He saw the clear signs of corrosion on the iron rod, the kind you'd expect if it had been submerged in an acidic electrolyte, like vinegar or grape juice, both readily available to the ancient Parthians who inhabited the area around 250 BC. Koenig proposed a shocking theory. This was a battery. He built replicas, filled them with grape juice, and sure enough, they produced a small but steady electrical current, somewhere between 0.5 volt and 2 volts. Not enough to power a city, but more than enough for a specific, delicate, and highly valuable task: electroplating. The theory goes that artisans could have wired several of these batteries together in series to generate a higher voltage. They would then use this current to apply a micro-thin layer of gold or silver onto a less precious metal. It was a way to create stunning, gilded jewelry and artifacts without using vast quantities of solid gold. And we actually have artifacts from the period that appear to be electroplated. Small vases from ancient Iraq are covered in such a thin, uniform layer of silver that many experts believe vapor deposition or electroplating, are the only plausible explanations for how they were made. If this is true, it means that some 2,000 years before Alessandro Volta invented the battery in 1800, ancient craftsmen in the Middle East had already harnessed the power of a sustained electrical current. Now, as you can imagine, this is a highly controversial idea in mainstream archaeology. The prevailing theory is much more mundane. Skeptics argue the jars were simply containers for sacred scrolls. They suggest the copper cylinder was just a protective sheath for a papyrus or parchment scroll, and the iron rod was what the scroll was wrapped around. The asphalt plug kept it safe from the elements. To them, any electrical potential is purely coincidental, a happy accident of chemistry and materials. But there's a problem with that theory. No scrolls or even remnants of scrolls have ever been found inside any of these jars. All we have is the strange copper and iron assembly, and while the Baghdad battery isn't Egyptian, it's Parthian. It proves that a culture in the same ancient neighborhood, a culture that traded with and was influenced by Egypt, may have had the technology to create electricity on demand. So, if the Baghdad battery is a tantalizing but ultimately foreign clue, is there any purely Egyptian evidence for a knowledge of electricity? The answer is yes. But it's not what you think. It's not a battery. It's a force they likely saw as pure magic, a gift from the gods. We have to remember the Egyptians were masters of textiles, and they prized certain exotic materials like amber, which they imported via long trade routes. The ancient Greeks, who learned so much from the Egyptians, had a word for amber: electron. Sound familiar? It's the root of our word electricity. Why? Because the Greeks knew that if you rubbed a piece of amber with a cloth, it would magically attract lightweight objects like feathers or hair. They had discovered static electricity. Now imagine an Egyptian high priest in a sacred temple, a place like Dendera. The air is dry. He is dressed in robes of fine linen, walking across wool carpets. In his hands he holds a ceremonial staff tipped with amber or a sacred relic wrapped in silk. With every step, every movement, his body is building up a massive static charge. Thousands of volts of potential energy. When he reaches out to touch a metal object or even another person, zap. A tiny visible spark jumps from his fingertip. A sharp tingling shock. To us it's a nuisance. To someone in 1500 BC it's a miracle. It's the tangible power of a god, channeled through their chosen representative on Earth. This wasn't a controllable current like from a battery, but it was undeniable proof of a mysterious, invisible energy. They wouldn't have understood the science of electrons, but they would have absolutely understood the cause and effect. Do this and the magic happens. It would have been a closely guarded secret of the priesthood, a powerful tool for demonstrating their divine authority. But they may have taken this principle much, much further. They may have built a device capable of storing a static charge so immense it was lethal. A device that has baffled historians and theologians for centuries. A device that comes not from a temple carving, but from the pages of the Old Testament, the Ark of the Covenant. According to the book of Exodus, the instructions for building the Ark were given to Moses on Mount Sinai. And Moses, the story tells us, was raised as a prince of Egypt, learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. The knowledge he used didn't just appear from a burning bush. It was the culmination of Egyptian science and engineering. And look at the Ark's design. It was a box of acacia wood, a poor conductor. This box was then plated inside and out with pure gold, an excellent conductor. The two layers of gold were separated by the wood, an insulator. This design is, for all intents and purposes, a perfect blueprint for a massive capacitor. A Leyden jar. It's one of the first devices we invented in the modern era to store an electrical charge. The two gold plates act as the conductive elements, and the wood acts as the dielectric insulator between them. The arid desert air would have been a perfect environment for building up a huge static charge on the Ark, either naturally from wind-blown sand or intentionally by the priests. The Bible is filled with chilling stories of the Ark's power. When it was being transported, the oxen stumbled, and a man named Uzzah reached out to steady it. The moment his hand touched the gold, he was struck dead instantly. Later, two of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, made an unauthorized offering before the Ark and were consumed by a fire that came out from the presence of the Lord. Mainstream religion interprets these as acts of a wrathful God, punishing those who disobey. But an electrical engineer would interpret them differently. They would see them as textbook cases of a massive high-voltage electrical discharge. Uzzah grounded the capacitor and paid the ultimate price. This wasn't a simple spark from a priest's finger. This was a weapon, a powerful electrical device, built using a sophisticated understanding of conductors and insulators, an understanding that Moses would have brought with him out of Egypt. So let's take stock. We have evidence, circumstantial as it may be, that the Egyptians or their close neighbors had developed a primitive battery. We have overwhelming evidence that they understood and likely manipulated static electricity for religious purposes. And we have the design for the Ark of the Covenant, a massive capacitor capable of storing a lethal charge, a design that almost certainly originated from Egyptian knowledge. They had the power source. They had the energy storage. The fundamental components of a simple electrical circuit were in their hands. Which brings us back to the crypt at Dendera, back to that strange, glowing flower. If the Egyptians possessed this level of electrical knowledge, if they could generate a current and store it, then the idea of them powering a light source is no longer so far-fetched. The question is no longer could they do it, but how? What were they using for wires to connect the power source to the device? And what exactly was the device itself? The hunt for the missing pieces of this ancient electrical puzzle leads us down a path of sacred geometry, golden secrets, and a truth about the pyramids that has been buried for millennia. And the heart of that truth lies not in a temple, but within the Giza Plateau itself. For centuries, we've been told a simple story. The Great Pyramid of Khufu was a tomb, a magnificent, oversized headstone for a powerful pharaoh. But this story is full of holes, holes so large you could drive a chariot through them. When the Arab Caliph Al-Ma'mun finally forced his way into the pyramid in 820 AD, he found nothing. No treasure, no inscriptions detailing Khufu's reign, not even a body. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber was empty, and it was made of granite so hard and carved so precisely that it remains a mystery how it was even created, let alone placed there. The mainstream explanation is that it was all looted in antiquity, a convenient answer that papers over 1,000 nagging questions. But what if the pyramid was never a tomb to begin with? What if its purpose was something far grander, something that would make the treasures of Tutankhamun look like pocket change? What if the Great Pyramid was a machine, a power plant? This isn't just wild speculation. The evidence is literally carved in stone, encoded in its very mathematics. The Great Pyramid is a masterpiece of sacred geometry. Its dimensions align almost perfectly with the golden ratio phi, a mathematical constant found everywhere in nature. From the spiral of a galaxy to the structure of our own DNA. The base of the pyramid, divided by its height, gives you a number incredibly close to pi. It's positioned with unbelievable accuracy at the geographical center of the Earth's landmass, and it's aligned to true north with a precision modern builders would struggle to replicate. Coincidence? Or a deliberate design feature, hinting at a level of knowledge we believe the ancient Egyptians simply didn't possess? This precision engineering extends to the materials themselves. The pyramid wasn't just built from any old rock. It was a carefully layered multi-component system, and each component had a very specific job. The core of the pyramid is made of millions of blocks of nummulitic limestone. This type of limestone is full of fossilized shells and contains a high level of magnesium, which gives it certain insulating properties. But the real magic begins with the other two primary materials. The inner chambers, like the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, were constructed from massive 50-ton blocks of Aswan granite. This isn't just any granite. It's red granite, which is incredibly rich in microscopic quartz crystals, up to 55% quartz. Now, why is that important? Because quartz has a remarkable property known as piezoelectricity. The word itself comes from the Greek piezein, which means to squeeze or press. When you apply mechanical pressure to a quartz crystal, it generates an electric charge. Squeeze it and you get a spark. It works the other way too. Apply an electric current to it, and it vibrates at a precise frequency. This is the principle behind everything from your quartz watch to your gas grill igniter. The builders of the Great Pyramid chose to line its most important chambers with a material that is, for all intents and purposes, a massive electrical transducer. But a power plant needs more than just a generator. It needs wiring and insulation. This is where the third material comes in, the original casing stones. We only see the rough, stepped core of the pyramid today, but it was once covered in 144,000 polished blocks of pure white Tura limestone. This limestone was special. It was incredibly fine-grained, almost completely free of magnesium, making it a fantastic electrical insulator. So you have a massive core structure, inner chambers lined with a piezoelectric conductor, all wrapped in a gigantic insulating shell. It's the exact model of a modern electrical capacitor. And what about the final piece of the puzzle, the very top of the pyramid? The capstone or pyramid ion is missing. Ancient texts refer to it as the Benben stone, and they describe it not as limestone or granite, but as something far more valuable. Many researchers believe the original capstone was made of solid gold, or electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. A massive, highly conductive metallic capstone, sitting at the apex of this gigantic, geologically engineered circuit board. What would its purpose be? To act as a giant antenna, drawing in energy from the atmosphere. Think about it. We have a structure designed with mathematical precision, built from materials with distinct conductive and insulating properties, and topped with a metallic conductor. But what was the power source? Squeezing a crystal creates a spark, but what was squeezing the 50-ton granite blocks inside the king's chamber? The answer might lie beneath the pyramid itself. The Giza Plateau is riddled with underground waterways and sits on top of a major aquifer. The Nile River used to flow much closer to the pyramids than it does today, flooding the area annually. Engineer Christopher Dunn, in his groundbreaking book The Giza Power Plant, proposed a stunning theory. He suggests that the pyramid harnessed the natural vibrations of the Earth itself, the subtle, constant hum of our planet. This seismic energy, possibly amplified by the movement of water in the subterranean chambers deep below the pyramid, would travel up through the structure. When these vibrations reached the granite of the king's chamber, they would cause the quartz crystals within to resonate, to be squeezed on a massive scale. This is the piezoelectric effect in action, converting the mechanical vibrations of the earth into electrical energy. The entire king's chamber would have hummed with power, acting as a resonant cavity, amplifying this energy to an incredible degree. This wasn't just electricity, it was likely something more akin to microwave energy. The so-called air shafts in the king's chamber, which don't point to any known stars and were sealed from the inside, weren't for ventilation. Dunn and others proposed they were waveguides, precisely aimed to channel this energy out of the pyramid. So we have a power source, the Earth's own vibrations. We have a generator, the piezoelectric granite chambers. We have an insulating shell, the Tura limestone. And we have an antenna, the golden capstone. The Great Pyramid wasn't a tomb for a dead king. It was a power station for a living civilization. It was designed to pull energy from the earth and the atmosphere, convert it, and then broadcast it. But broadcast it where? And how? A power plant is useless without a way to transmit its energy. You can't just run a giant extension cord across the desert. The Egyptians needed something more sophisticated. They needed a form of wireless power transmission. And this is where the theory takes a leap from incredible to seemingly impossible. The energy generated by the Giza power plant, this concentrated beam of microwave or acoustic energy, needed to be sent to a receiver, a device designed to capture that wireless power and convert it into a usable form. A device like a lamp or a tool or a light bulb. The Dendera Light, with its serpentine filament, its insulating jet pillar, and its lotus-shaped socket, wasn't just a symbolic carving. It was a schematic, a user's manual for a receiver designed to work with the Giza power grid. The energy broadcast from the pyramid would be captured by a device like the one depicted on the temple walls, causing the gas inside the bulb to ionize and glow, bathing the sacred, windowless chambers in a clean, brilliant electric light. This explains everything. It explains why there is no soot on the ceilings of the tombs and temples. It explains the advanced engineering of the pyramids. It explains the strange features of the Dendera relief itself. The cable connecting to the box isn't a cable for a local generator. It represents the invisible beam of energy, the very lifeblood flowing from the heart of the Giza Plateau. The power plant and the light bulb were two parts of the same lost system, a technological legacy that we are only now beginning to decipher. But if this is true, if the Egyptians had wireless electricity thousands of years ago, where did all the other devices go? Where are the wires, the tools, the evidence of this high-tech society? And what happened to this incredible knowledge? Why did it all just vanish? The answer to that question is perhaps the most shocking part of this entire story. and it involves a catastrophic event that not only plunged Egypt into darkness, but may have reset the course of human history itself. To understand the disappearance of this incredible technology, we have to zoom out. Way out. We have to look at the entire world as it existed more than 3,000 years ago. Because the event that plunged Egypt into darkness wasn't just an Egyptian problem. It was a global catastrophe, a civilization-ending apocalypse that historians today call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Before this collapse, around the year 1250 BC, the world was more connected and advanced than you might imagine. It was a golden age. A network of powerful, literate, and wealthy empires stretched from Greece to Mesopotamia. The Mycenaeans in Greece, the Hittites in modern-day Turkey, the mighty new kingdom of Egypt, they were the superpowers of their day. They had intricate trade routes, complex diplomatic relationships, and shared technologies. Bronze, the most important metal of the age, flowed across the Mediterranean. Grain from the fertile Nile fed distant populations. It was a delicate, intricate international system, a single humming machine of commerce and culture. And within this world, Egypt was at its zenith. This was the time of Ramesses the Great. The empire was stable, fabulously wealthy, and undertaking building projects on a scale that still boggles the mind. If there was ever a time and a place for a technology like clean, sootless electric light to be developed and perfected, it was here. It was now. In the heart of an empire with limitless resources, a highly organized workforce, and a priestly class dedicated to the pursuit of sacred knowledge. They had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Then, in the span of a single generation, it all burned. Starting around 1200 BC, the world fell apart. Not slowly, not gracefully, but violently and completely. The great coastal cities of the eastern Mediterranean were systematically destroyed, one by one. Ugarit, a thriving port city in Syria, was burned to the ground, its clay tablets baking in the inferno, freezing in time the last desperate letters pleading for help that would never arrive. The Hittite Empire, a civilization that had stood for 500 years, a power that had fought Egypt to a standstill, vanished completely. Their capital was sacked, their people scattered, their language forgotten. In Greece, the Mycenaean palaces, the legendary homes of Agamemnon and Odysseus, were all destroyed. Their complex writing system, known as Linear B, disappeared. Literacy itself was wiped from the region for centuries. It was a domino effect of destruction. Trade routes, the arteries of this ancient world, were severed. Without tin from Afghanistan and copper from Cyprus, you couldn't make bronze. Without bronze, you couldn't make tools or weapons. Economies cratered. Famine swept the land, driven by a period of intense, prolonged drought that crippled agriculture. Starving, desperate populations turned on each other, or were forced to migrate, becoming waves of refugees. And then came the Sea Peoples. This is one of history's greatest mysteries. Inscriptions from Egypt describe a terrifying coalition of invaders who swept in from the sea, a confederation of tribes with names like the Peliset, the Checker, the Shurden. Nobody knows for sure who they were or where they came from. They were a symptom of the chaos, a force of nature that the crumbling empires were too weak to stop. They were the final nail in the coffin. They made a conspiracy in their islands. The Egyptian records say, no land could stand before their arms. Their league was the Peliset, Sheker, Shikalesh, Denyen, and Weshish lands united. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting. Imagine a world where every major capital city from Italy to Iran is destroyed, where international trade ceases to exist, where the global economy collapses and 90% of the population dies or is displaced, where the very knowledge of how to read and write is lost for generations. This isn't a Hollywood movie. This is what happened at the end of the Bronze Age. It was a reset button for human civilization. And in the middle of this world on fire stood Egypt. Egypt was the last great empire left standing. Ramesses III, one of the last great pharaohs of the New Kingdom, fought two massive, desperate battles against the Sea Peoples, one on land and one on the sea at the mouth of the Nile. And against all odds, he won. He saved Egypt from the total annihilation that had consumed all its neighbors. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The cost was immense. The empire was shattered, its treasury empty, its borders shrinking. Egypt survived, but it was broken. It limped out of the Bronze Age and into a long period of decline and foreign domination known as the Third Intermediate Period. The Golden Age was over. The lights, you could say, had gone out all over the ancient world. Now, think about what happens in a collapse like that. It's not just about buildings falling down. It's about the loss of knowledge. Specialized, complex knowledge is the first thing to go. When society is fighting for its very survival, when famine and war are at the door, who has time to maintain a particle accelerator? Who has the resources to train a new generation of nuclear physicists? The knowledge becomes a luxury. The people who hold that knowledge, the engineers, the scientists, the master craftsmen, they die in the wars, they starve in the famines, or they simply have no one to pass their skills on to. The intricate supply chains required for advanced technology? Gone. The stable society needed to fund and protect research? Gone. The knowledge itself becomes fragmented, then misunderstood, then forgotten. It survives only as whispers, as legends, as myths of a bygone age when men could do impossible things. And this brings us back to the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. The Dendera temple we see today was built during the Ptolemaic period, 1,000 years after the Bronze Age collapse. This is a critical point. The skeptics will say, see, it's from a much later time, it can't be a record of New Kingdom technology, but they're missing the entire point. The builders of Dendera weren't inventors, they were archivists. Ancient Egyptian religion was profoundly conservative. Priests saw it as their sacred duty to preserve the knowledge of the past, to copy ancient texts and images with perfect fidelity. The inscriptions at Dendera explicitly state that they are copies of far older documents, referencing texts from the time of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. They saw themselves as the guardians of a sacred inheritance, a legacy from the golden age of their ancestors, the age before the Great Collapse. So what if the Dendera Light isn't a blueprint for a new technology? What if it's a memory, a fossil of a lost science, preserved in stone by priests who may not have even fully understood the principles behind it anymore? They were copying a sacred image from a time when their ancestors could command the very forces of nature, a time before the world fell into darkness. They were preserving the ghost of a machine. This would explain everything. It would explain why the technology isn't found everywhere. It was a high-level, perhaps secret technology from the peak of the empire that was lost in the chaos. It explains why we don't find the bulbs themselves. The delicate glass and metal components would have been destroyed or corroded over 3 millennia. All that's left is the manual, the diagram carved in stone, hidden deep within a temple crypt, a silent testament to a forgotten age of light. But this raises an even more disturbing question. If the priests of Dendera were trying to preserve this knowledge, why hide it? Why carve it in a secret, inaccessible crypt, encoded in complex religious symbolism? If you possess the secret to creating light, a secret from a lost golden age, why wouldn't you shout it from the rooftops? Why wouldn't you try to rebuild what was lost? Unless you were afraid. Afraid that the technology itself was dangerous. Afraid of what it could do in the wrong hands. What if the Dendera Light wasn't just a light bulb? What if the knowledge it represented was so powerful and so terrifying that the priests who guarded its memory believed the only safe thing to do was to bury it forever? To answer that, we have to stop looking at the snake in the bulb as a simple filament. In our modern world, a snake is just a reptile. But to an ancient Egyptian, the serpent was one of the most complex and powerful symbols in their entire universe. It was a creature of pure duality. On one hand, you have Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, the embodiment of darkness who tries to swallow the sun god Ra every single night, an engine of pure destruction. But on the other hand, you have the Uraeus, the rearing cobra seen on the brow of every pharaoh. That cobra wasn't just decoration. It was the symbol of divine authority, a protector of the king that was set to spit fire at his enemies. It was creation and destruction, order and chaos, life and death, all coiled into one potent symbol. So when the ancient priests carved a serpent inside this glass-like vessel, were they really trying to depict a simple source of light? Or were they depicting a contained, controlled, and weaponized force of nature, a captured piece of chaos, a harnessed Uraeus, ready to spit its fire on command? Suddenly, the image takes on a much more sinister and profound meaning. The figures aren't just holding a lamp, they are struggling to contain something. Look at their posture. It's one of reverence, yes, but also of immense care, like technicians handling a volatile piece of machinery. And then there's the jet pillar. Mainstream Egyptology tells us it's the symbolic representation of the backbone of the god Osiris. It stands for stability, endurance, and resurrection. In the context of the light bulb, It's been interpreted as a high-voltage insulator, the part that keeps the immense power from shorting out. And that makes sense. But what if its symbolic meaning and its technical function are one and the same? What if it wasn't just a passive insulator, the backbone of Osiris, the source of stability for the gods? What if the jet pillar wasn't just insulating the device? What if it was powering it? Think about it. We see no wires leading out of the crypt, no evidence of a massive power plant somewhere in the temple. The entire apparatus seems to be self-contained. What if the jet pillar was the ancient equivalent of a cold fusion reactor or a zero-point energy module, a device that drew power from an unknown source, stabilized it, just as Osiris stabilized the kingdom of Egypt and channeled it into the bulb to activate the serpent of fire within? This wasn't a light bulb you screw into a socket. This was a self-contained power unit of unimaginable sophistication, a technology so advanced it would rewrite not just our history books but our physics books too. This interpretation changes everything. The priests weren't hiding a lamp. They were guarding a power source. A source that could illuminate cities, yes, but what else? If you can generate that kind of energy, you can do more than just create light. You can create immense heat. You can create force. You can create a weapon. Is there any evidence for such a thing? In ancient texts, the gods of Egypt are not described as carrying candles. They are described as wielding weapons of fire, scepters that could shoot lightning, and tools that could level mountains. The famous Ark of the Covenant, from the same part of the world, was described in the Bible as a golden box that could strike men dead with energy and level city walls. For centuries, we've dismissed these stories as myth and metaphor. We called it the wrath of God or divine power. But what if it wasn't a metaphor? What if the scribes were doing their best to describe a technology they simply had no words for? What if the Dendera carving is our Rosetta Stone for understanding this lost divine technology? It's a blueprint hidden in plain sight for a weapon of the gods. Now imagine you are one of the last priests of the Dendera temple complex. It's the 1st century BC. The world you know is dying. The 1,000-year-old traditions are fading. The legions of Rome are marching across the world, conquering everything in their path with iron and steel. They are powerful, they are brutal, and they are coming for you. You and your brotherhood are the guardians of this secret. You hold the knowledge of the serpent of fire. You possess a power that could perhaps push back the Roman tide, a weapon that could incinerate legions. But you also understand the duality of the serpent. You know that such power, once unleashed, cannot be easily controlled. It is apophis as much as it is the uraeus. In the hands of men like the Roman emperors, such a weapon would not be used to protect. It would be used to conquer the entire world. It would lead to an age of unimaginable destruction. What do? Do you use the weapon and risk destroying everything? Or do you make the ultimate sacrifice? You decide that humanity is not ready for this knowledge, that the power of the gods is too dangerous for the world of men. So you perform one last ritual. You go down into the deepest, most secret crypt. You carve the blueprint onto the wall, not as a guide but as a warning, a final testament to the power you once held. You encode it in layers of symbolism so that only the truly wise could ever hope to understand it. And then you seal the crypt. You entomb the knowledge, praying that it will be safe forever, buried beneath tons of stone, hidden from the greed and ambition of the coming world. This wasn't an act of ignorance. It was an act of profound wisdom and sacrifice. They didn't forget how to make light. They chose to let the world fall into darkness to save it from the fire. Of course, the professional Egyptologists would have a much simpler explanation. They would say the entire scene is purely mythological. The bulb is not a bulb at all, but a lotus flower, a classic Egyptian symbol of creation. The snake inside is the god Harsomtus, the primordial serpent, being born from the lotus at the dawn of time. The jet pillar is simply the symbol of Osiris, lending his stability to the act of creation. The cable is just the stem of the flower. The whole thing is a beautiful, complex religious image about the birth of the cosmos. It has nothing to do with electricity, and that is a perfectly reasonable, elegant explanation. It fits neatly within our standard understanding of Egyptian art and religion. But does it fit all the facts? Does it explain the uncanny resemblance to a Crookes tube? Does it explain the precise technical details, the socket, the wire, the insulator? Why portray a mythological birth with elements that look exactly like a schematic for a high-voltage gas discharge tube? Is it all just a coincidence? One of the most staggering coincidences in the history of archaeology? Or are we looking at a case where the mythological explanation and the technical explanation are both true? Where the ancient Egyptians described their sacred technology through the language of their gods, merging science and religion in a way we can no longer comprehend. They didn't see a difference between the power of Osiris and a stable energy current. To them it was the same thing. This forces us to ask an even bigger question. If this technology was real, where did it come from? We see no evidence of a slow, gradual development of electrical engineering in Egypt. There are no primitive batteries, no simple circuits, no early experiments. They seem to have gone from zero to a highly sophisticated, self-contained power source capable of generating light or something far more powerful. It's like finding a blueprint for a stealth bomber in a medieval castle. It doesn't fit. The technological leap is just too vast. It suggests the knowledge wasn't developed. It was received, a complete package, a gift of immense power bestowed upon them. But if the Egyptians didn't invent this terrifying power themselves, then who did? The question hangs in the air, heavy as a granite block. If the power source in the Great Pyramid, the Baghdad Battery, and the Dendera Light weren't human inventions, who was the inventor? The easy answer, the one historians would give, is that there was no inventor because these things are all misinterpretations. But that's too simple. It ignores the sheer strangeness of the evidence. It dismisses the impossible leap in knowledge. So let's ask the forbidden question. Let's follow the evidence where it leads, no matter how uncomfortable the destination. The Egyptians themselves gave us the answer. They wrote it on every temple wall, in every papyrus scroll. They told us over and over again where the knowledge came from. It came from the gods. Now, for centuries we've interpreted that literally. We imagine hawk-headed sun gods and jackal-headed guardians of the underworld. We see them as myths, as allegories for the forces of nature. But what if we've been missing the point? What if the Egyptians weren't speaking in metaphor? What if they were recording history? Consider their creation myths. They speak of a time, a golden age they called Zeptepi, the first time. In this era, the gods physically walked the earth alongside humanity. These weren't ethereal spirits. They were described as powerful beings who ruled as the first divine pharaohs. They brought with them the gifts of civilization: agriculture, law, mathematics, astronomy, and technology. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was said to have authored thousands of books containing all the knowledge of the universe. Ptah, the creator god, was the master craftsman, the divine engineer. Are these just charming stories? Or are they a faded memory, a racial memory, of a real event? A memory of a time when humanity was mentored by a far more advanced intelligence. Beings who came from the sky, who possessed powers we would consider godlike, and who taught a fledgling human race the secrets of the cosmos. If a civilization capable of interstellar travel were to arrive on Earth 5,000 years ago, how would a primitive culture describe them? They wouldn't call them extraterrestrials. They wouldn't understand concepts like spaceships or advanced physics. They would use the only words they had. They would call them gods. Their vehicles would be celestial barks that sailed the sky. Their advanced tools, their energy weapons, their sources of light would be divine artifacts, imbued with magic. Look again at the Dendera relief. It's not just a drawing. It's a sacred text, a piece of technological scripture. The figures aren't just worshipping the device. They are operating it. They are shown in specific poses, their hands in precise positions, as if following a set of instructions. This isn't a scene of magical incantation. It's a scene of technical operation. The priests of Dendera weren't just holy men. They were the guardians of a sacred technology. They were technicians, entrusted with the maintenance and operation of a device they likely didn't fully understand, a relic from their divine ancestors. This explains the secrecy. It explains why this incredible technology wasn't widespread, why we don't find Egyptian light bulbs in every tomb. This knowledge was considered a divine inheritance. It was too powerful, too dangerous for the general population. It was a secret held by an elite priesthood, a sacred trust passed down through generations, hidden away in the deepest, most inaccessible crypts. They weren't hiding it from tomb robbers. They were hiding it from an unworthy world, safeguarding a power that could create, but could also destroy. They were preserving the last remnant of the gods. And this isn't just an Egyptian story. Pull back the lens and you see the same pattern repeated all over the ancient world, in cultures that had no contact with one another. In ancient India, the Vedic texts describe flying machines called vimanas in breathtaking detail. They speak of their propulsion systems, their construction materials, even their use in epic aerial battles, complete with weapons that sound eerily like modern energy beams and nuclear devices. In the Americas, the Maya and the Aztecs worshipped a feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, a pale-skinned, bearded figure who arrived from the sea, brought the gifts of writing and the calendar, and promised to one day return from the stars. The Sumerians, the very first civilization, claimed that all their knowledge was given to them by the Anunnaki, beings who from heaven to earth came. It's the same story told in different languages by different people, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. A story of celestial benefactors, of sky gods who descend to mentor humanity, bequeathing a cosmic inheritance of knowledge and technology. Is it possible that these are all just independent myths? Or is it more likely that they are all describing the same globe-spanning event, a visitation? Perhaps the best way to understand this is through a modern concept, the cargo cult. During World War II, American forces built airstrips on remote Pacific islands inhabited by tribes who had never seen modern technology. These tribes watched in awe as giant, noisy birds descended from the sky, delivering incredible cargo: canned food, steel tools, clothing, medicine. The pilots who emerged were seen as gods. After the war ended and the planes left, the islanders tried to bring them back. They built replica airstrips out of bamboo, carved wooden headphones, and performed rituals, mimicking the actions of the ground crews they had observed, hoping to summon the cargo-bringing gods once more. Now apply that logic to ancient Egypt. Imagine you are a priest living 5,000 years ago. You witness beings with technology so advanced it appears to be magic. You see them manipulating devices that generate light without fire. You don't have the words for plasma discharge, electrode, or high voltage. So you describe what you see using the concepts you understand. The glowing filament becomes a divine serpent. The glass bulb becomes a sacred lotus flower. The power cable becomes the stem of the flower. And the power source itself, the complex generator, you see it as a pillar of stability, the source of all power, so you call it the Jed pillar, the very backbone of the god Osiris. Suddenly, the bizarre imagery of the Dendera Light makes perfect logical sense. It's not a myth. It's a cargo cult schematic. It's a primitive people attempting to draw and describe a piece of highly advanced technology given to them by beings they worshipped as gods. They preserved the instructions, the operating manual, in stone, hoping to keep the divine gift alive. But why? Why would an advanced race travel across the stars just to give light bulbs to a Bronze Age civilization? Perhaps it wasn't a grand plan. Perhaps it was an accident, a crashed ship, stranded survivors sharing what they could to survive, their technology becoming the stuff of legend. Or maybe it was an experiment, a cosmic anthropological study. Or perhaps it was an act of compassion, a deliberate attempt to uplift a promising young species, to give them a nudge up the evolutionary ladder. We don't know the motive. All we have is the echo of their presence, carved into the walls of a dark, forgotten crypt in the Egyptian desert. A story, however compelling, is not definitive proof. The carvings are tantalizing, the global myths are suggestive, but it's still circumstantial. To truly believe something this extraordinary, we need more. We need hard physical evidence that can be measured, tested, and analyzed. What skeptics and even many mainstream Egyptologists fail to realize is that the evidence is there. It's not just in the carvings. It's in the impossible precision of the stonework. It's in the chemical composition of the pyramids. It's hidden within artifacts that sit in museum basements, mislabeled and misunderstood. The gods of Egypt left more than just stories. They left fingerprints. And those fingerprints are about to blow this mystery wide open. So what are these fingerprints? They're not smudges on a dusty relic. They are schematics, blueprints hiding in plain sight disguised as myth. And the most glaring, the most undeniable of all is the Jed pillar. Mainstream Egyptology tells us the Jed pillar is a symbol. It represents the backbone of the god Osiris, a powerful emblem of stability and endurance. And on a purely mythological level, that makes sense. But look at it. I mean, really look at it. Strip away the story for a second and just see the object. What you're looking at is a base, a vertical column, and 4 parallel rings stacked at the top. It's a design that seems oddly specific for a symbolic backbone. Now walk into any power substation today. Look up at the power lines. What do you see holding those high-voltage cables? You see ceramic insulators. And what do they look like? They are columns with stacked parallel rings. It's not a coincidence, it's physics. This design, known as a petticoat insulator, is engineered to increase the surface distance that electricity would have to travel to arc to the ground, preventing a short circuit. The ribbed, stack shape is one of the most efficient ways to insulate against high voltage. So we have a choice. We can believe that the ancient Egyptians, in creating a symbol for stability, just happened to randomly design an object that perfectly mirrors a modern high-voltage electrical insulator. Or we can consider the possibility that the jet pillar wasn't just a symbol of stability, but a functional provider of it. A piece of hardware designed to handle a level of power that, according to our history books, shouldn't have existed for another 3,000 years. The jet pillar isn't just supporting the Dendera device in the relief, it's insulating it. It's the critical component that allows the system to function without grounding out. It's the power base. And what's plugged into this power base? A long stem, which Egyptologists call a lotus flower, extends from the jet pillar. This stem forms the socket of our device. And emerging from this lotus socket, snaking its way through the center of the glass bulb, is the most controversial element of all, the serpent. Mythologically, this serpent represents Harsomtus, a form of the god Horus, born from the primordial lotus blossom, symbolizing creation and the rising sun. It's a beautiful story, but it asks us to ignore what our own eyes are telling us. Look at the earliest light bulbs, the experimental vacuum tubes of the 19th century, like the Crookes tube. What was inside them? A filament, an element that, when charged with electricity, would glow. And when you pass an electrical current through a wire in a low-pressure environment, what does it do? It forms a serpentine, snake-like plasma discharge. The snake in the Dendera relief isn't just a snake. It is depicted as an emanation, a form of energy. It originates from the socket and extends the full length of the bulb, just as a filament does. Its wavy, undulating form is a dead ringer for the electrical discharges seen in early gas discharge lamps. The Egyptians didn't have the language of filaments and cathodes. They didn't have words for plasma or voltage. So how would they depict it? They would use the symbols they knew. They would draw what it looked like. And an ethereal, glowing serpentine form of energy looks an awful lot like a divine glowing snake. This isn't just a loose comparison. It's a direct visual parallel. The snake is the filament. The lotus flower is the socket. The jet pillar is the insulator. And the entire assembly is contained within a large, transparent, oblong envelope. The bulb itself. Egyptologists suggest this bulb represents the womb of the goddess Nut, or the bubble of air in the primordial waters from which the sun god was born. Again, a poetic and fitting myth, but the depiction is so strangely technical. Notice how the figures outside the bulb are holding it. They are supporting it on stands. The device has weight. It has substance. It's not a mystical concept, it's a physical object. And crucially, it's shown as transparent, allowing us to see the filament inside. Why would you depict a mythological womb of the sky as a see-through container unless the purpose was to show the inner workings of a device? It's a cutaway diagram, an ancient Egyptian instruction manual carved in stone. This brings us to one of the biggest arguments skeptics use. If the Egyptians had electricity, where's the rest of the evidence? Where are the power plants, the copper wires running through the desert? This is a classic straw man argument. It assumes that their technology must look exactly like our technology. It's like asking a Roman legionary where his F-16 is. The absence of a modern-style power grid doesn't disprove the existence of localized, sophisticated electrical devices. Think about the Baghdad battery, a 2,000-year-old artifact from nearby Mesopotamia that consists of a clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod. When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, it produces a small but steady electric current. Mainstream archaeology still debates its purpose, often dismissing it as a vessel for storing scrolls. But many experiments have proven it works as a battery. It generates voltage. Now, imagine that technology not as a single small jar but scaled up. What if the Egyptians had developed a far more advanced, more powerful version of this electrochemical science? You wouldn't need a sprawling power grid. You would need a self-contained power source. And the jet pillar, often interpreted as a symbol, starts to look a lot more like a sophisticated version of that. Some theories propose it was a type of resonant transformer or a device for collecting telluric currents, natural electric currents from the Earth itself. It wasn't drawing power from a distant dam, it was harnessing it right there on the spot. And this leads to the most haunting piece of supporting evidence, something you can see with your own eyes if you visit the tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Look at the ceilings. For centuries, Egyptologists and tourists alike have marveled at the incredibly detailed, beautifully preserved paintings that cover every square inch of these underground chambers. The colors are as vibrant today as they were thousands of years ago. Now ask yourself a simple practical question. How did the artists see what they were doing? These tombs are deep underground in absolute total darkness. The conventional answer is that they used torches or oil lamps. But there's a huge problem with that theory: soot. Burning torches or oil lamps produces a thick, black, greasy soot that would have coated and blackened those pristine ceilings within hours. Archaeologists have found some lamps, but there is virtually no soot residue on the ceilings of the most important, intricately decorated passages and chambers. The math just doesn't add up. You cannot spend months, even years, painting a masterpiece on a ceiling while holding a smoky torch and leave no trace. The common counter-argument is that they used a complex system of polished copper mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into the tombs. And while this works for the first few yards, the physics of light dictates that with each reflection, the beam becomes weaker and more diffuse. To illuminate the deepest chambers, hundreds of feet from the entrance, would require a system of mirrors so perfect and so vast it would be a wonder of the world in itself, yet no evidence of such a system has ever been found. So they worked in darkness, with no fire and no sunlight. How? They needed a source of clean, bright, portable light. A light that didn't consume oxygen or produce smoke. A light exactly like the one depicted on the walls of the Dendera temple. They weren't just drawing a myth. They were drawing the very tool that allowed them to create the art we marvel at today. The relief isn't a story about the birth of a god. It's a schematic for the technology that let them conquer the darkness. And the hieroglyphs surrounding the image? They don't debunk this, they reinforce it. The texts speak of a high emanation from the lotus of radiating in the sky, a description that sounds far more like a technical manual than a simple creation myth. The priests of Dendera weren't just guardians of a faith. They were the keepers of a forgotten science. A science given to them by the gods like Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and invention. But this gift from the gods theory opens a door to an even more profound question. If this device is real, and the Egyptians were using it, who taught them? Where did this impossible knowledge come from? Because the science required to build a functioning gas discharge lamp isn't something you just stumble upon. It requires a deep understanding of electricity, vacuums, and glass-blowing technology. An understanding that seems to appear out of nowhere in the ancient world. It's a technology without an evolutionary chain. It's as if someone just handed them the finished product. And that possibility is far more unsettling than any myth. So who handed it to them? This is the question that sits at the very heart of the Dendera mystery. If this wasn't a slow, step-by-step technological evolution, then it was a revolution. A sudden leap forward. And in the history of human progress, leaps like that don't just happen. They are caused. They have a source. And when we look for the source of the Dendera Light, we are forced to venture into territories that make mainstream historians deeply uncomfortable. The first and most famous of these territories is the ancient astronaut theory, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken. This theory proposes a radical reimagining of our past. It suggests that in ancient times, our ancestors were visited by intelligent beings from other worlds. These beings, with their incomprehensible technology, were perceived as gods. Their spacecraft were seen as celestial chariots, their energy weapons as lightning from the heavens, and their advanced knowledge was a divine gift. In this context, the Dendera relief isn't a drawing of a myth. It's a diagram, a schematic. It's a record left by the Egyptians of a piece of technology given to them, or at least shown to them by these star visitors. The priests of Dendera weren't inventing a creation story. They were desperately trying to preserve a piece of sacred, powerful knowledge. They were carving into stone the memory of a device they may not have fully understood themselves. Think of it like a cargo cult. During World War II, isolated island tribes in the Pacific saw American military planes land, bringing incredible cargo, canned food, medicine, tools. When the war ended and the planes left, the islanders tried to bring them back. They built life-sized replicas of the planes out of straw and wood. They carved wooden headphones and radios. They were mimicking the form without understanding the function. They were practicing a ritual based on a technology that was, to them, indistinguishable from magic. Could the Dendera Light be the ultimate example of this? Perhaps the Egyptians witnessed these gods, using a device that produced light without fire. They saw its components, the glass bulb, the filament, the power source, and in their reverence they copied it. They enshrined it in their most sacred place, incorporating it into their own belief system. The snake god Harsomtus becomes the filament, the jet pillar becomes the insulator, the lotus flower becomes the socket. They were drawing what they saw, but translating it through the only language they had, the language of myth and religion. This would explain everything. It would explain the uncanny accuracy of the components, and it would explain the bizarre ritualistic context. It wasn't a machine they were building, it was a holy object they were venerating. The blueprint became the god. But what if the source of this knowledge wasn't from the stars, but from our own planet? What if it came from a chapter of human history that has been almost completely erased? This leads us to the second possibility: the existence of a lost, highly advanced human civilization. An Atlantis, if you will. The idea most famously described by Plato is that long before the Egyptians, the Sumerians, or any other known ancient culture, there existed a civilization that reached an incredible peak of technological and social development, only to be wiped out by a global cataclysm. A great flood, an asteroid impact, a polar shift. The survivors, scattered and few, would have been like gods among the primitive hunter-gatherer tribes that also populated the earth. They would have carried with them the memory of their former world. A world of science, of engineering, of electricity. Perhaps they tried to pass this knowledge on to restart the engine of civilization. In this scenario, the Dendera Light is not a gift from aliens, but an inheritance. It is an echo of a forgotten human past. The priests of Dendera were the guardians of a legacy, a secret science passed down through generations from a time when humans commanded the power of the sun. This theory has a powerful appeal because it doesn't require us to believe in visitors from other planets. It only requires us to believe that we, as a species, are capable of both incredible heights and catastrophic failure. It suggests a cyclical view of history, rather than a linear one. We are not necessarily at the pinnacle of human achievement. We may simply be in the process of rediscovering what was once common knowledge. And the Dendera Light doesn't stand alone. It's part of a disturbing pattern of what are called out-of-place artifacts. Look at the Baghdad Battery, a set of terracotta pots from 2,000 years ago containing iron rods and copper cylinders, which, when filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar, produce a small but steady electrical current. Mainstream archaeology dismisses them as containers for sacred scrolls, but their construction is identical to a simple galvanic cell. Then there's the Antikythera mechanism, an astonishingly complex astronomical clock discovered in a Roman-era shipwreck. With its system of over 30 bronze gears, it could predict eclipses and track the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with a precision that wouldn't be seen again for another 1,500 years. These artifacts, like the Dendera relief, seem to appear out of nowhere. They have no technological ancestors. They are leaps, not steps. When you see them not as isolated curiosities, but as pieces of a single shattered puzzle, the idea of a lost global technological civilization becomes much harder to dismiss. They are the scattered fragments of a world that was. So whether the knowledge came from the stars or from a forgotten age of man, the implication is the same. The priests at Dendera were safeguarding more than just a myth. They were the keepers of a profound secret. And this raises a chilling question. Why was it a secret? Why depict it in such a cryptic, mythological way? Hidden deep within a temple, accessible only to the highest initiates? The answer may be simple: because the technology was dangerous. Power is always dangerous. The ability to generate light without fire is the first step toward a host of other technologies. It's the key that unlocks the modern world. Such power in the hands of the wrong people could be used not just to illuminate a temple, but to forge weapons, to dominate armies, to enslave populations. Perhaps the priestly class of ancient Egypt wasn't just a religious body. Perhaps it was a secret society of scientists and engineers, preserving a flame of knowledge they knew the world was not ready for. They encoded it in myth, wrapped it in layers of symbolism, turning a scientific diagram into a religious icon. It was the perfect camouflage, To the uninitiated, it's a story about a snake god being born from a lotus. But to those who held the key, it was a manual, a guide to harnessing the very power of the cosmos. They weren't hiding it from the people, they were protecting the people from it. They understood that some knowledge is too powerful to be shared freely. This transforms our entire perception of the ancient world. We imagine them as primitive, superstitious people, struggling with the basics of survival. But what if, within the elite circles of their society, there was a level of understanding that rivaled our own? What if they knew about electricity, about mechanics, about astronomy, in ways we are only just beginning to appreciate? It suggests that history is not a straight line of progress, but a labyrinth of secrets, of lost knowledge, and of carefully guarded power. The story they told the world was a simple myth, but the truth they carved in stone was something else entirely. It was a warning, a legacy, and a blueprint for a technology that could change the world. But even if they had the blueprint, even if it was a gift from the stars or a memory from a lost world, one colossal problem remains. A blueprint is one thing, a finished product is another. To actually build a working electric lamp, you need more than a drawing. You need materials. You need manufacturing. You need the ability to blow glass into a perfect vacuum bulb. You need to draw metal into a filament of precise thickness. You need to generate a high-voltage, low-amperage current. Could the Egyptians, with their Bronze Age tool kit, have possibly possessed the industrial capability to create such a device? The schematic seems to be there on the wall, but the means to construct it? That seems like an impossible leap, unless they had help not just with the idea but with the creation itself. And the evidence for that might be hiding in the very stone of the temple. The very stone of the temple. It sounds cryptic, but it's the key. We've been so focused on the images carved into the stone, we've forgotten to look at the stone itself. Not just at Dendera but all across Egypt. Because when you do, you find a problem. A massive civilization-defining problem that mainstream Egyptology struggles to explain. The problem is precision. Go to the Giza Plateau. Look at the casing stones of the Great Pyramid, what few remain. They were fitted together with a tolerance of 1/50th of an inch. Edges so straight you can't slip a razor blade between them. These aren't soft limestone blocks we're talking about. We're talking about granite, one of the hardest stones on Earth. The official explanation is that the Egyptians did this with copper chisels and bronze saws, lubricated with sand and water. They painstakingly pounded, ground, and polished for decades. But engineers and stonemasons today look at this work and just shake their heads. To achieve that level of precision on that scale, even with modern diamond-tip saws and laser-guided cutting tools, would be a monumental undertaking. To do it with copper tools? Copper is a soft metal. It can't effectively cut granite. It would be like trying to cut down an oak tree with a butter knife. The tool would deform long before the stone would. But the pyramids are just the beginning. The real mystery lies in the artifacts. Travel to the Serapeum of Saqqara, a subterranean network of tunnels holding 25 colossal granite boxes. Each one is carved from a single block of Aswan granite, weighing around 70 tons, with the lid weighing another 100 tons in total. They are polished to a mirror-like finish both inside and out. The internal corners are perfectly square. The surfaces are optically flat to within a few 10,000ths of an inch. How do you carve a perfectly square internal corner into a block of solid granite with a copper chisel and a rock? You don't. How do you move a 100-ton box through tight underground tunnels and lower it into a crypt? The official answer is ropes, ramps, and manpower. But the math just doesn't add up. Then there's the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, still lying in its quarry. It would have been the largest in the world, weighing nearly 1,200 tons. It was abandoned because a crack formed during its carving, but it gives us a priceless look into their methods. The quarry walls around it are covered in strange, scooping marks, as if a giant ice cream scoop came and carved out tons of granite at a time. The official explanation is that thousands of workers bashed the stone for years with handheld dolerite pounders. But the patterns, the sheer scale of material removed, it doesn't look like the result of hand tools. It looks like the work of a massive, powerful machine. And perhaps most baffling of all are the stone vases. At the Step Pyramid of Saqqara, archaeologists found over 40,000 stone vessels. Many are made from diorite, one of the hardest stones on the planet. These vases are exquisitely crafted, with long, impossibly thin necks, and hollowed-out interiors that bulge outwards. Think about that. How do you hollow out a stone that's almost as hard as diamond, through a neck that's only an inch or two wide, and then carve the inside to be wider than the opening? It defies all logic for a primitive tool set. It screams of a technology we would recognize today. A high-speed lathe. But a lathe capable of shaping diorite? That's a 20th century invention. So what does this have to do with the Dendera Light? Everything. We've been stuck on the question of how the Egyptians could have possibly manufactured a complex glass bulb, a filament, and a power source. We assumed they had a Bronze Age level of technology because that's what the history books tell us. But the stone itself tells a different story. The stones are screaming that this wasn't a Bronze Age civilization. If they possessed a technology capable of quarrying 1,200-ton blocks of granite like scooping butter, a technology that could drill perfect holes through diorite and machine stone boxes with laser-like precision, then suddenly manufacturing a sophisticated piece of electrical equipment doesn't seem like such an impossible leap. The very same advanced, unknown technology that shaped the Serapeum boxes and the Aswan obelisk could have easily been used to craft the components for the Dendera Light. The missing industrial base, the lack of factories and tools, it's only missing if we assume they used our path to technology. What if they had a different path? A more direct one? This suggests a level of science and engineering that was not developed over centuries, but perhaps inherited. A legacy technology. Think about it. We find these incredible feats of stonework in the earliest periods of Egyptian history, and then the quality seems to decline over time. The later pyramids are rubble compared to the masterpieces at Giza. It's as if the Egyptians were the inheritors of a lost golden age of technology. A technology they could use but not replicate. A technology they didn't fully understand, that slowly broke down and faded over millennia. And if they inherited it, who did they inherit it from? The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers. They wrote about everything: tax collection, bread baking, religious rituals. But there are no records of how they built the pyramids. No schematics for the Serapeum boxes. It's a glaring omission. Unless the records aren't missing. Unless the records are the myths themselves. Stories of gods who came from the stars, who possessed incredible powers and gave knowledge to mankind. The god on the Dendera relief, Harsomtus, is born from a lotus flower, a symbol of creation and primordial birth. He is depicted inside the bulb, the source of the light. The priests who commissioned this carving weren't just priests. They were astronomers, scientists, keepers of sacred knowledge. The famous Dendera zodiac, found on the ceiling of the very same temple, shows an understanding of astronomy and the precession of the equinoxes that is thousands of years ahead of its time. This wasn't just a temple. It was a repository of knowledge, a place where the secrets of the gods were preserved. And if those gods were not mythological beings, but physical visitors with advanced technology, then the relief in the crypt isn't a metaphor for creation. It's a schematic, a diagram of a real device, a gift from the gods who had the power to move mountains and cut granite like cheese. The priests weren't just worshipping Harsomtus. They were documenting the technology he brought with him, a technology of light. We have now established a plausible technological context. We have a motive for its creation and a reason for its secrecy. But this raises a final terrifying question. If this device was real, and it was housed in the deepest, most secret crypt of a temple dedicated to cosmic knowledge, was it really just a light bulb? Or was its purpose something far grander, far more powerful, and far more dangerous? What was the true function of the Dendera Light? To answer that, we have to step back from the black and white debate that has raged for decades. On one side, you have the mainstream Egyptologists, who see a purely symbolic mythological scene. A snake, representing the god Harsomtus, emerging from a lotus flower, a classic Egyptian symbol of creation and rebirth, all supported by a jet pillar, representing the spine of the god Osiris, a symbol of stability. To them, the case is closed. It's a beautiful, complex religious image and nothing more. On the other side, you have the alternative theorists, the engineers, the electrical pioneers. They see a cathode, an anode, a glass envelope, and a high-voltage insulator. They see a blueprint for a functioning piece of technology, a Crookes tube, a low-pressure discharge lamp. To them, the case is also closed. It's proof of lost ancient technology, a smoking gun that rewrites our entire understanding of the past. But what if both are wrong because both are right? What if we've been asking the wrong question all along? The question isn't, is it mythology or is it technology? The real question is What if the Egyptians saw no difference between the two? Think about the core of Egyptian belief, the concept of Heka or magic. To the Egyptians, Heka wasn't staged tricks or superstition. It was the fundamental energy of the universe, the power the gods used to create the world. It was a force that could be studied, understood, and by the most learned priests manipulated. Words, symbols, rituals. These weren't just representations of reality, they were tools to actively shape it. Now look at that relief again through their eyes. This isn't just a picture of a myth. It's a diagram, a ritualistic schematic. It's a set of instructions carved in stone for a device that was both mythological and technological. It wasn't designed to simply illuminate a dark room. That's thinking too small, too modern, too utilitarian. The purpose of the Dendera Light was infinitely more profound. Its purpose was to reenact the moment of creation itself. Let's break it down. The Djed pillar. Yes, it's the spine of Osiris, a symbol of stability. But what do you need more than anything when dealing with high-voltage electricity? Stability. A stable platform. A powerful insulator to separate the immense power from the ground, from the profane world. The symbol is its function. The lotus flower. Yes, it's a symbol of rebirth, the primordial lily from which the sun god Ra was born at the dawn of time. But in this device, it is the vessel, the container, the womb or the glass envelope, where the miracle of first light is made to happen again. The symbol is its function. And the snake. The snake is the key. It is Harsomtus, the uniters of the two lands, but it's also the very image of raw, untamed energy. A serpent of fire. A bolt of lightning. In modern physics, we would call it plasma, the fourth state of matter, the electrified gas that makes up the stars. The Egyptians were showing the invisible, primal energy of the cosmos taking form, being born from the lotus, stabilized by the pillar of the gods. The symbol is its function. The Dendera Light wasn't a light bulb. It was a theological engine, a ritualistic device designed to generate a physical manifestation of divine power. It was an attempt to create a small contained spark of Zep Tepi, the first time, the legendary golden age when the gods walked the earth. By running a current through this device, by making the serpent of energy glow in the dark, the priests weren't just turning on a lamp. They were proving their mastery over the fundamental forces of creation. They were demonstrating, in the most sacred and secret place in the temple, that they held the knowledge of the gods. This explains everything. It explains why it looks so uncannily like a Crookes tube, because to build a device that manipulates plasma and electrical fields, you would inevitably arrive at a similar design. Form follows function, whether in a 19th century lab or a Ptolemaic temple crypt. It explains why it's a purely mythological scene, because for the Egyptians, the technology was the mythology brought to life. The device was a prayer made real. And most importantly, it explains the location. Why hide a simple light bulb in a tiny, suffocating crypt deep beneath the temple floor? You wouldn't. But a device that channels the raw power of creation? A machine that blurs the line between the mortal and the divine? That is the most powerful and dangerous secret imaginable. That is knowledge you protect at all costs. It's not for the public. It's not even for most of the priests. It is a holy of holies, accessible only to the highest initiates who had undergone the decades of training required to understand and respect the forces they were wielding. The inscriptions surrounding the relief, which Egyptologists translate as hymns to the gods, suddenly take on a new, chilling meaning. They aren't just praise. They're operating instructions and warnings. They speak of the power of Harsomtus, the glowing serpent, and the protection of the Djed. They are the technical manual and the user safety warning, written in the only language that could convey the cosmic gravity of the device, the language of mythology. So, what happened to the actual device? It was likely never meant for permanent installation. It was probably assembled only during the most important ceremonies, a piece of ritual technology brought out to reaffirm the power of the temple and its connection to the gods. It may have been made of precious materials, gold, silver, crystal, and was likely disassembled and hidden away, or perhaps even destroyed when the temple was eventually abandoned, to keep its secrets from falling into the wrong hands. The creators of the Dendera relief weren't primitive people stumbling upon a strange natural phenomenon. They were masters of a different kind of science, a holistic science where physics and metaphysics were two sides of the same coin. They weren't trying to build a better torch. They were trying to build a gateway to the gods. They were bottling lightning, not to see in the dark, but to hold the very fire of heaven in their hands. In the end, the Dendera Light is a profound lesson. It teaches us that our modern way of seeing the world, with a hard line separating science from religion, the practical from the spiritual, is not the only way. It's a Rorschach test for our own civilization. We look at it and see a light bulb because that is the limit of our common imagination. But the Egyptians saw a universe of meaning, a fusion of power and purpose that we are only just beginning to comprehend. The truth of the Dendera Light is far more awe-inspiring than a simple lamp. It is a monument to a lost understanding of the cosmos. It is a testament to the idea that the greatest technologies are not those that just serve our bodies, but those that seek to elevate our souls. The secret hidden in that dark, lonely crypt wasn't about electricity. It was about the electricity of life itself. The greatest secrets are not always buried under miles of sand. Sometimes they are carved in plain sight, on a temple wall, waiting patiently for thousands of years for us to finally learn how to read the instructions.